Good evening and welcome to War Thunder. This is the website one more time. We are here for the last devblog for the evening. This is a little bit more difficult than the typical devblog we might have going on, and the reason is because the nature of the location. The Aleutian Islands was a site of the I believe it was one of only two attacks on the U.S. mainland during World War II. The Aleutian Islands are located between Alaska and Kamchatka in the northern Pacific Ocean. I've researched this one in the past a few times, and it is the first time I'll be actually speaking to it. This will be more summary than anything else, and relatively short, but you can only be relatively short so much when you're talking about a year of more than a year of World War II history. So I'll try and sum things up. The Japanese coordinated an attack on the Aleutian Islands to coincide with their intended assault on Midway Island in June of 1942. They occupied two remote islands in the Aleutian chain. A joint U.S.-Canadian force was sent to reclaim the islands in May of 1943. The Japanese force consisted of 2 aircraft carriers, 5 cruisers, 12 destroyers, 6 submarines, and 4 troop transports. U.S. forces, apprised of the approaching assault because they had already broken the Japanese communication codes, attempted to locate the enemy fleet using naval patrol aircraft. While they did locate the fleet, weather prevented a follow-up attack. The Japanese launched an air assault on Dutch Harbor on June 3rd, though damage was minimal due to heavy fog, with only 17 Nakajima B-5N2 bombers managing to find and attack the harbor. They immediately came under heavy AA fire and counterattacked by fighters from Fort Glenn Army Airfield. The Japanese made cursory strafing runs, dropped their bombs, and retreated. A follow-up attack by the Japanese on June 4th was better organized, resulting in damage to the hospital, oil storage tanks, and a beached barracks ship. The American response located the enemy fleet but were unable to engage due to bad weather. On June 6th, the Japanese landed in force on the island of Kiska, followed by the island of Attu on the 7th. They met little resistance on the undefended islands, capturing a 10-man Navy weather team and their pet dogs on Kiska, and a small group of native Aleuts. Quoting the National World War II Museum, one member of the weather team, aerographer's mate, First Class William C. House, managed to evade capture for 50 days before he was forced to turn himself in or starve to death. When he entered Japanese captivity, he weighed about 80 pounds. On the island of Attu, the Japanese liberated 43 Unangan native Aleutian Islanders and captured C. Foster Jones and his wife Etta. Foster Jones was taken to be questioned by the Japanese and was never seen alive again. He was the only American killed during the Japanese occupation of the Western Aleutians. One Unangan female was wounded. 3 months after the Japanese occupation of Attu, the liberated Unangan and Mrs. Jones were put aboard a cargo ship and sent to Kiska, where they spent a day before continuing on to Japan aboard a destroyer. Approximately half of the Aleuts would die during their stay in Japan. Close quote. The U.S. took nearly a year to begin a full counterattack, though initial steps were taken. In August 1942, an airbase was established on Adak Island, and U.S. aircraft began bombing Japanese positions on Kiska. Japanese ships were sunk in Kiska Harbor by both warships and aircraft. On July 5th, the submarine Growler attacked 3 Japanese destroyers off Kiska, sank one, and damaged the other 2. The Grunion was attacked by 3 Japanese subchasers on July 15th, with the results of the loss of 2 subchasers and the 3rd damaged. The Japanese submarine I-31 was attacked and sunk on May 12, 1943, in surface action with the destroyer Edwards. On May 11th, U.S. troops landed on Attu Island to commence the retaking of the island. Horrible weather, bad conditions, and entrenched Japanese on the high ground combined to result in the loss of 549 men killed, 1,148 wounded, and an additional 1,200 suffering injuries from the weather. On May 29th, the Japanese attacked near Massacre Bay in one of the largest banzai charges of the Pacific Campaign, penetrating so deeply into U.S. lines that they were engaged with rear echelon units in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese force was virtually wiped out, with only 28 men taken prisoner. The U.S. burial teams interred 2,351 Japanese dead. Hundreds were presumed killed and buried by artillery fire. With the brutal events of Attu fresh on their minds, a joint U.S. and Canadian force landed on Kiska, numbering more than 34,000 men, on August 15, 1943. The Royal Canadian Air Force saw active service, and one enemy aircraft was downed. With horrendous weather blinding all the combatants, casualties mounted to 313, despite the fact that Japanese troops had abandoned the island on July 28th. The deaths were to a combination of booby traps, friendly fire, disease, mines, vehicle accidents, and frostbite. The men did rescue a half-dozen dogs that had been with the Navy weather team, including one named Explosion. The Aleutian campaign ended after 439 days of warfare. In War Thunder, the Aleutian Islands will be represented by a fairly classical naval warfare map with a shallow area suitable for torpedo boats, dotted by small islands and a surrounding area of deeper water for larger vessels. The Aleutian campaign, the assault on the Aleutian Islands, was particularly brutal, made even worse by the fact that in some cases the deaths were entirely tragic and needless. But this this edition as a naval map is at least an acknowledgement of a forgotten chapter of World War II history. Thank you for joining me this evening. I actually hope to get onto Naval with the upcoming patch. I want to see this map in first myself, and see if it holds true to the area it honors. Thank you for joining me this evening, and see you on the battlefields of War Thunder.